in modern or indeed ancient times have we seen anything like 40% shunning the two big parties of the day.
The election campaign of 2024 began with a big Labour lead baked into the polls, and it's ending with a big Labour lead baked into the polls. In the words of Theresa May, in another context, nothing has changed. Or has it? Let's speak to Peter Kellner, pollster, former president of YouGov. Peter, let me come straight to the first question here. In terms of polls, has anything changed these past 6 weeks?
A little bit has changed, Andrew. Labour is down a bit. The Conservatives are down a bit. The Lib Dems are up a bit. Reform is up a bit bigger. It looks to me the Labour-Tory gap, which stayed pretty well constant until a few days ago, has very, very slightly narrowed. There's signs now that Labour is drifting below 40%, the share of the vote, and the Conservatives, to me, fairly securely above 20%. Now, whether that'll continue or reverse in the last 24 hours, I'm not so sure. But at the moment, it looks to me as if the Conservatives are facing a catastrophe, but not quite the extinction that looked possible 2 or 3 weeks ago.
So on the eve of voting, are you saying, Peter, the best way to think of it, the final polls before everyone goes to the ballot box, is that Labour a little bit above 40 and the Tories around 20? And so that gap of 20 has pretty much stayed.
Well, no, almost that, Andrew. I reckon in the last 24 hours, I've seen 7 final polls from different companies. And looking at them together, it looks to me as if Labour's a bit below 40 now, and the Tories, let's just say 38-39 Labour against 20-21 Conservative. So we're looking at a 17 or 18% lead, which is, of course, enormous. Nothing in the post-war era, with the possible exception of Margaret Thatcher's landslide in 1983, has approached it. But whereas it was 20 or 21% 2 or 3 weeks ago, it's that little bit closer.
Well, it will be of significance. It won't affect the result, and Labour's majority will still be huge, however you cut it. But it will be significant in some ways if that Labour vote is actually just a little tad under 40%, because that means that it would be likely that Keir Starmer would win a supermajority with a lower share of the vote, quite a bit lower, than Theresa May got when she lost her majority in 2017. What do we make of that?
And indeed, could well be below the figure that Labour got on Jeremy Corbyn against Theresa May in 2017, when Labour got, I think, 41% of the vote, and Labour lost. And it could well add up with under 38-39% and win. But I mean, it's partly obviously because the right of centre vote is split. But there's something else, Andrew, which I think is of significance. That the combined, well, we know that the Tories are going to be miles worse than any general election since Robert Peel founded them almost 200 years ago, well short of the previous worst Tory performance. But if you add the Tory and Labour likely votes together, that'll probably come out at about 60%, 60-61. The lowest two-party total we've had in British history was in 2010, when it was 67%. So we're going to get 4 out of 10 people shunning both main parties. And no British election in modern or indeed ancient times have we seen anything like 40% shunning the two big parties of the day.
Well, it could be seen then, Peter, to reinforce the view that although the country wants to see the back of the Tories, and there can be little doubt of that, and it wants to see the back big time, they're not exactly gagging for Mr. Starmer or his party. The way they actually didn't want just rid of the Tories in 97, they actually were rather looking forward to the Blair-Brown Labour Party.
No, that's absolutely right, Andrew. One of the questions I've been asked a lot in the last few weeks, as I'm sure you have been, is if Labour gets a landslide victory, does that guarantee 10 years? Does it guarantee they'll in the next election, not just this one? And my response is not at all, because the Labour landslide is more than anything a function of the division on the right. if the Conservatives get their acts together between now and the next election, then the vote that Labour gets this time, even if it holds just absolutely still that they don't lose any votes, it may not be enough next time to give them a secure victory. Historically not only full of records, but in many ways a very strange election.
Well, I'm taking on board what you say, Peter, because on election night in 2019, when the exit poll came in, giving a lead that surprised a lot of us about the size of the Tory lead, I remember saying live on air that this was a Tory majority for 2 terms. I hadn't taken into account Mr. Johnson's ability to screw that up. So I'm not going to say that again because of what you've just said. And I would also suggest that Labour, as they take over the reins of power, need to be a bit careful perhaps and just keep in mind that their support isn't ocean wide, but it's maybe just a village pond deep.
Yeah, that's right. Look, in 1997, as I said earlier, Labour came to power with a very popular new Prime Minister, Tony Blair, and in very kind economic circumstances. They could throw quite a lot of money at quite a lot of issues like health and education, and then have another landslide 4 years later. Well, now we have Keir Starmer, whose ratings are miles better than Rishi Sunak's, but they're not that great, and very difficult economic circumstances. But my view, if I may just leave the numbers for a moment, I think it's vital for Labour to establish a narrative at the very, very beginning, which is much closer to Churchill's blood, toil, tears and sweat than it is to Blair's things can only get better.
Yes, glad morning again, as Ronald Reagan put it at one stage. And Blair kind of, it was a beautiful May Day back in '97, May the 1st, the sun was shining. It did seem like a new, as Mr. Blair said, a new dawn has broken, has it not? We all remember that. Peter, the Tories in the final days of this campaign, they seem reduced to trying to stop a Labour supermajority. That, of course, implies that Labour is getting a majority. As a general proposition, as an approach to fighting elections, is that even a credible strategy?
Well, if we were winding the clock back 6 weeks to the very beginning and the Tories were making a real effort to win the election, no, because what has been absolutely constant throughout this election, and I've been following the polls, as you can imagine, with some care every day, the number supporting Conservative plus Reform, the right bloc, has been pretty well constant, and the left bloc, Labour, Liberal Democrats, Green, SNP and so on, that has been constant, and it's been roughly high 50s to the left, high 30s to the right. There was no way the Conservatives would win that election without eating in to the centre-left voters. But as it's become clear that those voters are not going to move, all the Conservatives can do is maximise their votes amongst the right of centre, the 35-38% to the right of centre. That means going after the shy Tories. That means going after Reform. All that ends up doing is reducing their defeat, but it's never been a strategy for winning the election.
No, Peter, I understand that. Peter, thank you for that. Thank you for marking our card on the day before the country goes to the poll for the election of 2024. It's a historic event, whatever the outcome. Peter Kellner, thank you very much.